Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet. Near the taxi, no longer obliged to think, she became divine again. Instead of getting in, she had already grasped between two fingers the ruffle of her black dress and lifted her left foot as Gogi, already settled, was inviting her in. She let out a burst of strident laughter, festive or mad, turned to the driver, and laughing in his face, said, "Oh, no, with the driver. I always get in with the driver, so there." And she became kittenish. "Does the driver mind?" The driver was a regular fellow who knew his business. All taxi drivers are procurers and traffic in snow. The fan in Divine's fingers did not unfold. Besides, Divine did not take the fan to throw people off the track. She would have been mortified at seeing herself mistaken for those horrible titty females. "Oh, those women," she would say, "those wicked, wicked things, those vile sailors' tarts, those tramps, those dirty nasties. Oh, those women, how I hate them." The driver opened the door of his own seat and, smiling pleasantly, said to Divine, "Come, get in, baby." Oh, that driver, he's. Cracklings of taffeta riddled the driver's splendid thigh. The day was wide awake when they reached the garret, but the darkness made by the drawn curtains, the odor of tea, and even more, the odor of gogi, engulfed them in a night of magic. As was her wont, Divine slipped behind the screen to take off her morning dress and put on a pair of pajamas. Our Lady sat down on the bed and lit a cigarette. At his feet, the mossy mass of the lace of his dress made for him a kind of rustling bass. And with his elbows on his knees, watched, chance having accepted and instantly organized them. Gorgis evening jacket, white satin vest, and pumps assumed before him on the rug the form of the evidence that a ruined gentleman leaves on the banks of the Seine at 3 in the morning. Gorgi went to bed naked. Divine reappeared in green pajamas because, for the room, the green of the cloth was becoming to her ochre-powdered face. Our Lady had not yet finished his cigarette. "You coming to bed, Dani?" "I am. Just wait till I finish this." As always, he answered as one answers from the depths of thought. Our Lady never thought of anything, and that was what gave him the air of knowing everything straight away, as by a kind of grace. Was he the favorite of the Creator? Perhaps God had let him in on things. His gaze was purer, emptier than Dubarry's after an explanation by her lover, the king. Like Dubarry, at that moment he did not realize that he was moving in a straight line toward the scaffold, but since men of letters explain that the eyes of little Jesuses are sad unto death at the anticipation of Christ's passion, I have every right to request you to see in the depths of Our Lady's pupils the microscopic image, invisible to your naked eye, of a guillotine. He seemed numbed. Divine ran her hand through the blonde hair of Our Lady of the Flowers. "You want me to help you?" She meant help him undo his dress and take it off. "Okay, grab hold. Go on." Our Lady dropped his butt and crushed it on the rug. Standing on the toes of one foot, he took off one shoe, then the other. Divine unlaced the back of the dress. She stripped Our Lady of the Flowers of one part, the prettiest part of his name. Our Lady was a little tight. The last cigarette had made him woozy. His head rolled and suddenly fell on his chest, like those of the plaster shepherds kneeling on the tree trunks in the Christmas mangers, when you put a coin in the slot. He hiccuped with sleep and ill-digested wine. He let his dress be taken off without the slightest movement to help himself. And when he was naked, Divine lifted up his feet and toppled him on the bed, where he rolled again sick. Usually Divine slept between them. She saw that today she would have to content herself with remaining on the outer edge, and the jealousy which gripped her at the tabernacle revived her bitterness. She turned off the lamp. The ill-drawn curtains admitted a very thin ray of light, which was diluted into blonde dust. The room was filled with the chiaroscuro of poetic mornings. Divine lay down. At once she drew Our Lady to her. His body seemed boneless, nerveless, with milk-fed muscles. He was smiling vacantly. He smiled in this complacent way when he was mildly amused, but Divine did not see the smile until she took his head in her hands and turned toward herself the face that at first had been turned toward Gorgi. Gorgi was lying on his back. The wine and liquor had dulled him, as they had dulled Our Lady. He was not sleeping. Divine took Our Lady's closed lips into her mouth. We know that his breath was fetid. Divine therefore wanted to shorten her kiss on the mouth. She slid down to the foot of the bed, licking as she went the downy body of Our Lady, who awoke to desire. Divine buried her head in the hollow of the murderer's legs and belly, and waited. Every morning it was the same scene, once with Our Lady, and the next time with Gorgi. She did not wait long. Our Lady suddenly turned over on his belly, and holding his still supple tool, roughly thrust it with his hand into Divine's open mouth. She drew back her head and pursed her lips. The violent member turned to stone. Go to it, condottieri, knights, pages, ruffians, gangsters. Under your satin, go stiff against Divine's cheek. And tried to force open the closed mouth, but it knocked against the eyes, the nose, the chin, slid down along the cheek. That was their game. Finally, it found the lips. Gorgi wasn't sleeping. He sensed the movements by their echo on Our Lady's naked rump. What a fine pair! You're getting me all hot. I want to get in on this. He stirred. Divine was playing at offering herself and withdrawing. Our Lady was panting. Divine's arms encircled his solemn flanks. Her hands caressed them, smoothed them, though lightly, so as to feel them quiver with her fingertips, as when one tries to feel the eyeball rolling under the lids. She ran her hands over Our Lady's buttocks, and behold, Divine understood. Gorgi mounted the blonde murderer and tried to penetrate him. Despair, terrible, profound, unparalleled, detached her from the game of the two men. Our Lady was still seeking Divine's mouth and found the eyelids, the hair, and in a voice broken with panting, but moist with smiling, he said, "Ready, Sec?" "Right," said the Negro. His breath must have been blowing through Our Lady's blonde hair. A furious movement started above Divine. That's life, Divine had time to think. There was a pause, a kind of oscillation. The scaffolding of bodies collapsed into regret. Divine's head climbed back to the pillow. She had remained alone, abandoned. She was no longer excited, and for the first time she did not feel the need to go to the toilet to finish off with her hand. Divine might have got over sex and Our Lady's offense had it not been committed in her home. She would have forgotten it, but the insult was likely to become chronic, since all three seemed to be settled in the garret permanently. She hated Sec and Our Lady equally, and she felt quite clearly that this hatred would have blown over had they left each other. She would keep them in the garret no longer. I'm not going to fatten up those two sloths. Our Lady was becoming hateful to her, like a rival. In the evening, when they had all got up, Gorgie grabbed Our Lady by the shoulders and, with a laugh, kissed him on the back of the neck. Divine, who was preparing tea, acted as if her thoughts were elsewhere, but she could not refrain from glancing at Our Lady's fly. A new fit of rage seized her. He had a hard-on. She thought she had stolen this glance without being seen, but she lifted up her head and eyes just in time to catch the quizzical glance of Our Lady, who was pointing at her for the Negro's benefit. "You might at least be decent," she said. "We're not doing any harm," said Our Lady. "Ah, you think so?" But she did not want to seem to be expressing disapproval of an amorous understanding, nor even to seem to have discovered it. She added, "You can't stay a minute without roughhousing." "We're not roughhousing, eh, baby? Here, take a look." He was showing, clutching it in his fist, the bump under the throbbing cloth. "That's a serious matter," he said with a laugh. Gorgie had let go of Our Lady. He was brushing his shoes. They drank their tea. Never had Divine had the occasion, never had she dreamed of being jealous of the physique of Our Lady of the Flowers. There's every reason to believe, however, that this jealousy existed, that it was veiled, hidden. Let us recall a few small facts that we have merely noted in passing. Divine, once refusing Our Lady her mascara, her joy quickly concealed at discovering the horror of his foul breath, and, without realizing it herself, she pinned to the wall Our Lady's ugliest photo. This time, the physical jealousy, we know how bitter it is, was obvious to her. She planned and carried out in thought acts of frightful revenge. She scratched, slashed, amputated, lacerated, flayed, revitriolized. "May he be odiously mutilated," she thought. As she wiped the teacups, she carried out appalling executions. After laying aside the dishcloth, she was pure again, but, however, returned among humans only by a skillful gradation. Her acts bore the marks of it. Had she taken vengeance upon a faggot, Divine would doubtless have achieved a miracle of the martyrdom of San Sebastian. She would have shot a few arrows, but with the grace she had while saying, "I toss you an eyelash," or "I toss you a bus." A few scattered shafts, then a salvo. Would have defined the faggot's contours with arrows. Would have imprisoned her in a cage of arrows and finally nailed her outright. But she wanted to make use of that method against Our Lady. But this method was to be carried out in public. Though he allowed anything in the garret, Our Lady would not tolerate being kidded in front of the gang. He was ticklish. Divine's arrows hit against granite. She looked for arguments, and naturally she found them. One day, she caught him red-handed in an act worse than selfish. They were in the garret. Divine was still in bed. The evening before, Our Lady had bought a pack of cravens. When he awoke, he looked for the pack. There were only 2 cigarettes left. He handed one to Gorgie, took the other, and lit them. Divine was not sleeping, but she kept her eyes closed and tried to look as if she were still asleep. "It's to see what they're going to do," she said to herself. The liar knew perfectly well that it was a pretext to keep herself from seeming annoyed if they forgot her in the distribution, and to enable her to retain her dignity. Now that she was nearing 30, Divine began to feel the need of dignity. Trifles shocked her. She, who when young, had been of a boldness that had made barmen blush, herself blushed, and felt herself blushing at the least little which, by the very subtlety of that symbol, recalled states in which she had really been able to feel herself humiliated. A slight shock, and terrible, because the slighter, brought her back to her periods of wretchedness. You will be surprised to see Divine growing in age and sensitivity, whereas the common notion is that the older one gets, the thicker one's skin becomes. She was no longer ashamed, obviously, of being a queen for hire. If need be, she would have boasted of being one who lets jism flow through her 9 holes. It was all the same to her if men and women insulted her. Until when? But she lost control of herself, became crimson, and almost failed to pull herself together without a scandal. She clung to dignity. With her eyes closed, she imagined Sek and Our Lady scowling in order to excuse each other for having reckoned without her. When Our Lady made the blunder of uttering aloud the following remark, which grieved Divine, entrenched in her night of closed eyes, a remark that emphasized, indeed, proved the fact that a long and complicated exchange of signs concerning her had just taken place. There are only 2 cigarettes left. She herself knew that. She heard the match being struck. After all, they're not going to cut one of them in half, she answered herself. Well, he should have cut it. The he was Our Lady, or even have done without it and left it for me. So, from this scene dated the period when she refused what Sek and Our Lady offered her. One day, Our Lady came home with a box of candy. The scene was as follows: Our Lady to Divine. You want a candy? But Divine noticed he was already closing the box. She said, No, thanks. A few seconds later, Divine added, You never give me anything in a generous way. I am generous. If I didn't feel like giving it to you, I wouldn't offer it to you. I never ask you twice when I don't feel like giving. Divine thought with additional shame, Never has he offered me anything twice. Now when she went out, she always wanted to be alone. This practice had only one effect, of drawing the Negro and the murderer closer together. The phase that followed was one of violent reproaches. Divine could no longer contain herself. Fury like speed sharpened her insight. She exposed intentions everywhere. Or was Our Lady obeying without realizing it the game she was directing, and which she was directing to lead her toward solitude, and still more, toward despair? She overwhelmed Our Lady with invective. Like fools who do not know how to lie, he was a dissembler, caught in the trap. He sometimes blushed. His face lengthened literally, for the 2 wrinkles along his mouth strained it, drew it downward. He was pitiable. He did not know what to answer and could only smile. This smile, constipated though it was, relaxed his features, unwrinkled his morale. In a way, like a sunbeam traversing a thorn bush. He had gone through a thicket of invective, and yet he knew how to seem emerged unscathed, with no blood on his fingers. Then Divine, in a rage, tore into him. She became pitiless, as she could be when she went after someone. But Our Lady hardly felt her arrows. We have told why. And if at times, finding a tenderer spot, the point entered, Divine buried the shaft up to the feathers, which she had smeared with a healing balm. She feared at the same time that if Our Lady were wounded, he would get violent. And she was angry with herself for having shown too much bitterness, for she thought quite wrongly that Our Lady would be quite happy about that. To each of her poisoned remarks she added a touching restorative. As Our Lady never noticed anything except the good that one seemed to wish him, that's why he was said to be trusting and without guile, or perhaps also because he caught only the ends of her sentences. It was only these ends that struck him, and he thought that she was finishing a long compliment. Our Lady cast a spell on the pains Divine took to wound him, but without his knowing it, he was shot through with evil arrows. Our Lady was happy in spite of Divine, and thanks to her. When Our Lady one day admitted to the thing that humiliated him, having been robbed and abandoned by Marchetti, Divine held Our Lady's hands. Though she was overwhelmed and her throat grew tense, she smiled gently, so that both of them would not be moved to the point of despair, which would probably have lasted only a few minutes but would have marked them for life, and so that Our Lady would not dissolve in that humiliation. This was exquisitely sweet to her, like the feeling that melted me to tears when, "What's your name?" the butler asked me. "Jean." And when he called me to the servants' hall for the first time, he cried, "Jean!" It was so good to hear my first name. I thought I had found a family through the tenderness of the servants and masters. I now confess to you that I have never felt anything but the appearance of warm caresses, something like a look full of deep tenderness which, directed to some handsome young creature standing behind me, passed through me and overwhelmed me. Gorgy hardly ever thought, or did not show that he might be thinking. He walked about through Divine's tirades, concerned only with his linens. One day, however, this intimacy with Our Lady, which Divine's jealousy had begotten, caused the Negro to say, "We're going to the movies. I've got tickets." Then he caught himself. "Am I an ass? I always think there are only two of us." This was too much for Divine. She resolved to put an end to it. With whom? She knew that Sek enjoyed that happy life. It gave him shelter, food, and friendship, and the timorous Divine feared his anger. He would surely not have abandoned the garret without a Negro's revenge. Finally, she again found herself, after a period of pause, preferring exaggerated virility, and in this respect Sek more than satisfied her. Should she sacrifice Our Lady? What would Gorgy say? She was helped by Mimosa, whom she met in the street. Mimosa, old lady. "I've seen her, Bobby, bye, bo, boo. I love that Our Lady of yours. Always just as fresh, always just as divine. She's the one who's divine." "You like her?" Amongst themselves, the queens always spoke of their sweethearts in the feminine. "You want her?" My. So she doesn't want you anymore. My poor dear. Our Lady gives me a pain in the ass. First of all, she's stupid, and I find her lifeless. You don't even get her a hard-on anymore." Divine thought, "You bitch, I'll fix you." "Well, you're really letting me have her?" "All you've got to do is take her, if you can." At the same time, she hoped that Our Lady would not let himself be taken. "You know she detests you." Right. First they hate me and then they adore me. But look, Divine, we can be good pals. I'd like to get hold of Our Lady. Let me have her. One good turn deserves another, my sweet. You can count on me." "Oh, Mimo, of course I know you. You have my confidence, my quite." "The way you say that. But look, I assure you, at heart, I'm a good girl. Bring her over some evening." "And what about your man, Roger?" "She's leaving her military service. Don't you worry down there with those cute officers. She's going to forget me." "Ah, I'll really be the quite widowed. So I'll take Our Lady and keep her with me." "Why, you've got two sweeties. You've got them all." "All right, fine. I'll talk to her about it. Come and have tea with us about 5 o'clock." "What a nice girl you are, Divine. Let me kiss you. You're still pretty, you know. A bit rumpled, nicely rumpled, and so kind." It was in the afternoon. It was perhaps 2 o'clock. As they walked, they held each other by their two pinkies, curved in the form of hooks. A little later, Divine found Gorgy and Our Lady together. She had to wait until the Negro, who no longer left Our Lady, went to the toilet. Divine prepared Our Lady as follows. "Look, Danny, do you want to make 100 francs?" "What's up?" It's like this. Mimosa would like to sleep with you for an hour or two. Roger's going into the army. She's being left alone. Oh, 100 hell. That's not enough. If you're the one who made the price, you didn't knock yourself out. He sneered, and Divine, I didn't make any price. Look, go with her, and you'll work it out. Mimosa's not stingy with guys she likes. Of course, you can do whatever you please. I'm just telling you, you can do as you like. At any rate, she's coming to the garret at 5 o'clock. Only we'll have to get Gorgie out of the way, you understand, so we can be freer. We're going to fuck in the garret with you? Oh, don't be silly. No, you'll go to her place. You'll have time to talk the matter over, but don't swipe anything. Please, don't swipe anything, or there'll be trouble. Ah, there's something to swipe? But don't worry, I don't rob pals. Try to make it last. Be a nice little pimp. Divine had very intentionally and very cleverly suggested theft. It was a sure way to manage Dany. And what about Gorgie? When he returned, Our Lady told him what was up. You ought to do it, Danny. All the Negro saw was the 100 francs, but then a suspicion occurred to him. Up to now he had thought that the money that Our Lady had in his pockets came from his clients, but the scruple he observed in him today made him think that there was something else. He wanted to know what, but the murderer was suppler than a snake. Our Lady had resumed his cocaine business. In a little cell-shaped bar on the Rue d'Elysée des Beaux-Arts, every 4 days he met Marchetti, back in Paris, and Broke, who supplied him. The dope was contained in little tissue paper bags, gram by gram, and these bags were themselves in a bigger one of brown cloth. He had devised the following system. He kept his left hand in the torn pocket of his trousers in order to be able to soothe or stroke his violent member. In this left hand he held a long string, from which there was swung, inside the trouser leg, the dark bag. If the dicks come along, I let go of the string, and the packet falls to the ground without making a riot. Like that, everything's all right. He clung by a string to a secret organization. Every time Marchetti gave him the dope, he would say, All right, kid, and accompanied the remark by a look that Our Lady recognized among Corsicans, who make use of it amongst themselves when they brush against one another on the sidewalk and mutter, Ciao, Rico. Marchetti asked Our Lady whether he had guts. It's coming out of my ears. Brother bullshit, someone answered. Here I cannot refrain from coming back to those words of argot, which stream from pimp's lips as his farts, pearls, stream from darling's downy behind. The reason is that one of them, which, more perhaps than all the others, turns me inside out, or, as darling always says, gnaws at me, for he is cruel, was uttered in one of the cells in the mousetrap that we call 36 tiles, a cell so narrow that it is the alleyway of a ship. About a husky guard, I heard someone mutter, the locksucker. Then, a moment later, the yardarm. Now it so happened that the man who said that had told us that he had been at sea for 7 years. The magnificence of such an achievement, impalement by a boom, made me tremble from head to foot. And the same man said a little later, Or if you're a fairy, you let down your pants and the judge gets it in the bullseye. But this expression was already Rabelaisian. It was an unhappy expression, and destroyed the charm of the other one. And I regained my footing on the solid basis of joking, whereas poetry always pulls the ground away from under your feet and sucks you into the bosom of a wonderful night. He also said, Cock-ass suckaroo. But it was no better. At times, during my most harrowing moments, when I'm pestered by the guards, I sing within that poem, the yardarm, that I apply to no one in particular, but comforts me and dries unwelled tears as I sail across becalmed seas, a member of the crew we saw around 1700 on the frigate Coulefoy.